The slap landed like a whip crack in a church. Everything stopped. The boy, no more than 5, stumbled back, one cheek red, breath caught in his throat. The first-class cabin, filled with polished wood and whispered conversations, froze mid-air. And from seat 2C, Dr. Arvind Malhotra looked up. He wasn't just Elijah's father. He was also the architect behind Ether Ethics, the invisible scoring system that powered cabin integrity for 84 airlines, the same system this flight was currently operating under. He didn't yell, didn't ask what happened. He simply rose. Slow, controlled. Like someone accustomed to shifting systems without making a sound. The woman in uniform, Rita Halverson, 56, 30 years in the air, still had her hand half raised, eyes wide with the realization of what she'd just done.
I thought he was tampering with the seat, she stammered. He wouldn't stop pushing buttons.
Arvind ignored her. His eyes were on Elijah, who stood stiff, blinking rapidly. Elijah, he said gently, kneeling beside him. What's the current dignity score of this airline? Elijah sniffled. 73, just above minimum threshold. Okay. He brushed his son's curls aside, then stood. From the inside pocket of his charcoal blazer, he pulled out a narrow tablet, unbranded, matte black. He tapped in a 4-digit code. The interface lit up quietly. Ether Ethics. Internal monitoring. Cabin status. Active. A single option glowed red. Flag. Incident. Tier 4. Minor physical contact. Violation of passenger ethics protocol. He tapped. Nothing beeped. Nothing flashed. But the system shifted. In less than 4 minutes, flight control in DC would receive the first alert. By the 10-minute mark, 76 flights across the partner network would be placed under ethics compliance hold. Back in seat 2C, Arvind sat beside his son, arm wrapped around his shoulders. You did nothing wrong, he said softly. Outside, clouds passed in silence. Inside, the real turbulence had just begun, one that wouldn't shake the plane, but the entire system behind it. Arvind had always believed a silence could do more damage than noise. He was 12 when it happened the first time, on a flight from Mumbai to Frankfurt. His little sister Priya had asked for orange juice. The flight attendant rolled her eyes and snapped, "Not for coach kids who keep pressing buttons." No one said a word. Not his parents. Not the man in the business suit next to them. Not even Priya, who sank into her seat like she'd done something wrong. 34 years later, Arvind still remembered that silence. It's what inspired him to build Ether Ethics, a system that didn't depend on whether anyone spoke up. It monitored, recorded, rated, quietly, precisely, like code should. When the airline industry finally agreed to adopt it 3 years ago, they thought it was just another back-end tool, an analytics layer to keep regulators off their backs. But Arvind hadn't built it for analytics. He'd built it for moments like this, when a 5-year-old got slapped in plain sight and everyone just looked away. A few rows behind him, Rita Halverson had resumed her duties like nothing had happened. She moved down the aisle, refilling water, offering warm towels, her mask back on. But something had already shifted. Across 3 time zones, servers in Palo Alto, Munich, and Singapore had just downgraded the airline's passenger integrity index. The flag triggered by Arvind's tap wasn't just a report, it was a chain reaction. And in exactly 7 minutes, every airport in the Ether Ethics network would receive a compliance alert. No alarms, no confrontation, just quiet consequence. In seat 2C, Elijah leaned into his father's side. "Are we in trouble?" he whispered. "No," Arvind said, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. "We're just rewriting the protocol." He wasn't angry, but the system he'd built, the one that let silence finally speak, was now fully awake. "First class isn't a daycare," Rita muttered, barely under her breath. She was standing near the galley, arms crossed, whispering to another crew member who offered only a tight nod in return. Passengers nearby looked away. Others pretended not to hear. Arvind heard it all. He didn't flinch, didn't rise. Instead, he reached for the linen napkin on his tray and carefully wiped a smear of syrup from Elijah's chin. They'd just finished breakfast. Elijah had devoured his mini waffles, still humming the Boeing 777 engine specs under his breath. The boy had almost forgotten what happened 20 minutes ago. Almost. Arvind hadn't forgotten. Not the slap, not the silence, not the way Rita looked at his son like he didn't belong here, like he was too loud, too curious, too brown for this polished cabin. But he didn't call for a supervisor. He didn't demand an apology, because Arvind didn't believe in scenes. He believed in systems. And systems, if built right, never needed to shout. A quiet vibration on his tablet confirmed the first round of flags had been validated. The airline's internal trust score had dropped below 70. Anything under 75 triggered a pre-audit across all Ether-partnered hubs. He glanced up just in time to see Rita pause by a passenger in 4A. The woman, a tech exec from Austin, judging by the Salesforce sticker on her laptop, looked directly at Arvind, then back at Rita. Her expression said everything. People had noticed. They just didn't know what to do. Arvind did. He tapped one more field on the back-end interface. Repeat violation risk, moderate to high. Recommended FAA review, yes. Then he closed the tablet, placed it neatly in the seat pocket, and turned to Elijah. "Want to see the flight path map?" he asked. Elijah nodded, and just like that, the man who built a system to catch injustice before it disappeared sat quietly beside his son as the consequences began moving faster than the plane itself. The flight was quiet, too quiet, not peaceful, not calm, just tight. Like the oxygen had dropped a few notches, but no one wanted to admit it. Rita Halverson moved stiffly through the aisle, checking belts and cups. Her smile rehearsed and a little too bright. She avoided looking at seat 2C entirely. Elijah was now asleep, curled up against his dad with his head on Arvind's chest, breathing steady. Arvind stroked his hair with one hand while the other rested casually near the closed tablet in the seat pocket. He didn't need to open it again. The chain had already started. At Gate 46 in Denver International, a transcontinental agent stepped out of her kiosk, confused at a new notice. Ether ethics violation flagged. Passenger safety index under review. By the time she radioed her supervisor, 5 other gates in 3 airports had received the same alert. No one panicked. Not yet. These alerts didn't come with sirens or blinking lights. Just a yellow code quietly blinking across back-end terminals. The kind that made ground staff shift in their seats, suddenly aware someone upstairs was watching. Back on the flight, Captain Howard Blake stepped out of the cockpit and headed down the aisle, stopping at 2C. His smile was polite, corporate. "Dr. Malhotra," he said, nodding. "I understand there was an incident earlier." Arvind looked up slowly. "I flagged it internally," he said. Calm, almost gentle. Captain Blake nodded once, carefully. "Understood. Let me know if there's anything you need." He walked on, but his face was pale. He knew the name. Everyone in commercial aviation did. 10 rows back, a woman scrolled her phone and paused. "Wait," she whispered to her husband. "Isn't that the guy from Forbes who runs the flight compliance thing?" The husband shrugged, but the shift had already begun. In the air, everything looked normal, but on the ground, a system was recalibrating, and a web of terminals across the country was lighting up, quietly, coldly. The turbulence hadn't started yet, but the plane was flying directly into it. Rita walked the aisle again, but this time her steps weren't so sure. No one glared at her. No one raised their voice. And that silence, that polite, unsettling silence, made her skin crawl. At the front galley, she caught a glimpse of the lead attendant's tablet. One line blinked across the airline's internal crew dashboard. "Audit alert. Passenger ethics triggered. Seat 2C, Tier 4 violation under review. Rita's stomach turned. Captain Blake stepped into the crew rest area just moments later. He looked at her for a long second before speaking. "Rita, is there anything I should be aware of?" She hesitated. "I was just enforcing safety protocol. The boy was playing with the seat controls. I only—" Blake cut her off, gently but firmly. "They weren't playing. They were observing." She stood frozen for a moment, then walked back toward the main cabin, hands shaking slightly. When she tried to pour coffee for seat 4D, her hand trembled just enough for a few drops to spill onto the tray table. The woman sitting there gave her a raised eyebrow, and the whispers started. "Who is that kid?" an older man in 5A murmured. "The captain came out just to check on him." Another passenger leaned over and whispered, "I heard his dad designed that global ethics system for airlines. You know, the one they can't override." No one confirmed it, but the fear was taking shape. Back in seat 2C, Arvind hadn't said a word. Elijah was still asleep, his small hand loosely gripping his father's shirt. Arvind tilted his head slightly, like he could hear more than just the rustle of newspapers and the hum of jet engines. He could feel it, the ripple, the quiet collapse of a crew's confidence. And Rita? After 30 years in the sky, for the first time, she had no idea what would happen when the plane touched down. The seatbelt light was off, but no one moved. Not really. A few passengers shifted in their seats, sipped water, stared blankly at the in-flight map. But the energy in the cabin had shifted. The kind of shift that didn't show up on radar, but everyone felt it. Up front, Captain Blake returned to the cockpit, jaw tight. His co-pilot glanced at him. "What's going on?" Blake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up the crew alert log. More flags, from 3 different compliance terminals, all linked to the same passenger, seat 2C. "Someone at HQ is watching this flight like a hawk," he muttered. In the galley, 2 flight attendants whispered low, "Why is the audit team already pinging our flight ID?" "I don't know. I just got a notification that gate operations at LAX requested pre-landing risk assessment. That never happens unless—" They both turned toward Rita, who stood near the curtain, pale. She had just gotten a text. Short, clinical. "Behavioral incident filed under active review. Crew status pending." No name, no call. Just that. Rita looked toward 2C. Arvind hadn't moved. He wasn't typing. He wasn't scrolling. He was just waiting. And that terrified her more than yelling ever could. 1 row behind Arvind, a young woman pulled out her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She'd seen something, enough to start writing a post. Her boyfriend nudged her. "You sure you want to post that?" She didn't reply, because the moment felt like it was already turning. The silence, the watching, the sense that someone important was on that flight. And they weren't happy. At 36,000 feet, no one could hear lawsuits being filed or contracts getting reviewed. But in the language of corporate aviation, this was the storm warning. And Rita, who once ran crews across 5 continents, could feel it. Her wings weren't safe anymore. At LAX Gate 22, a junior agent refreshed her screen. Again, the inbound flight status had gone from green to flagged for supervisor review. A blinking yellow tag. No audio alert. Just quiet urgency. Behind her, the operations manager was already on a hushed call. "Yes, seat 2C, confirmed. He's on board." Pause. "No, he hasn't spoken, but the audit trail's already generating." "Yes, we're prepping an executive lane on landing." Back in the sky, 35,000 feet above it all, Arvind's tablet vibrated once, just once. He looked down, pressed a biometric key. A clean blue interface lit up with a single message. "Tier 1 ethics review initiated. System-wide suspension queue pending your final nod." His eyes didn't narrow. He didn't react. He simply tapped acknowledge and slid the tablet back into the seat pocket. To his right, Elijah stirred, then settled again. Still asleep, still unaware. But something had shifted. A few rows back, a college-aged guy filming out the window turned his phone discreetly toward the aisle. He'd caught Rita flinching when the tablet buzzed. He didn't know who Arvind was, not exactly, but the vibe said don't mess with this man. At the rear galley, the second-in-command whispered to Blake via crew comms. Gate staff just asked if there's a VIP compliance passenger on board. That ever happened before? Not in 20 years, Blake muttered. Then added, more to himself, but there's always a first. The cabin air felt thinner now, like it was holding its breath, and Arvind, still silent, still watching. But now, with one touch, the web was moving. All across the compliance network, from Denver to San Diego, servers blinked into action. The system had waited for his signal. Now it was awake. And somewhere in the distance, for those who knew what to listen for, the sky was about to change. The captain's voice broke the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Los Angeles. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." It was the calmest announcement most people had ever heard. But inside the crew cabin, it sounded like a warning bell. Rita checked her watch. They'd be on the ground in 25 minutes, just 25. She tried to pour water for the passenger in 3A, but her hand trembled again. She hadn't seen Arvind move, not once, but something about him had made the entire crew feel like they were flying with a live wire on board. Not a threat, but a force, one they didn't know how to disarm. Back at Gate 22, the whispers had already made it past the terminal. One baggage handler had heard it first from the catering crew. Some VIP kid got slapped. CEO Dad's on board. Someone tweeted it. The post had no names, just vague wording. Heard a toddler in first class got smacked by a stewardess. Problem is, his dad owns the system the airlines rely on. Whole crew's about to be unemployed. Hashtag flight 2187, nav to LAX. It only took 20 minutes for it to cross 140,000 views. By the time the plane dropped below 10,000 feet, the comment section was already a firestorm. Inside the cockpit, Captain Blake got a secure message on his internal comms. Landing crew requested executive discretion. Hold passengers until FAA liaison arrives. He sighed, glanced at the empty coffee cup on the dash. Here we go. At the galley, Rita's headset buzzed. "Crew channel secure," said the dispatcher's voice. "Rita Halverson, this is HR Control. We need you to acknowledge receipt of an incident flag." Rita's face drained. I don't understand. I haven't even been interviewed." "That's irrelevant. You were observed in violation. Please prepare for debrief on ground. Until then, remain available but non-confrontational." The call ended, and the realization settled in. She was no longer leading this flight. She was a passenger on it, with no map, no script, no allies. Row 2C remained still. Arvind hadn't so much as shifted. But when Rita looked at him now, she didn't see a father or a business-class traveler. She saw a man with the power to unmake careers, quietly, legally, without lifting his voice. Across the aisle, a child stirred. Elijah blinked awake and looked up. "Are we there yet, Daddy?" "Almost," Arvind said, smoothing his son's hair. And somewhere beneath the clouds, Los Angeles waited. So did the cameras, the agents, the silence about to be broken. The wheels touched down with a smooth hum. But what followed wasn't normal. Instead of taxiing straight to the gate, Flight 2187 paused just shy of the terminal. The captain's voice returned, calm as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your continued patience as we await clearance from ground operations. Please remain seated." Outside, 3 black SUVs pulled up beside the jet bridge. From the window in row 5A, a man blinked. "Is that Federal?" 2 minutes later, the front door of the aircraft opened. But it wasn't gate agents who boarded. It was 2 men in navy jackets. No smiles, no small talk. They spoke to the lead attendant, then turned straight toward the galley. "Ms. Halverson?" one of them asked, his voice quiet but firm. Rita stood frozen.
We need you to come with us. But
she started, then stopped. There was no point. With a slow nod, she placed her crew badge into her vest pocket, straightened her blazer, and followed them out. No words were spoken, but the passengers, they felt it. A young man whispered to his girlfriend,
I think she's the one who slapped the kid.
In 2C, Arvind helped Elijah gather his toy and little blue backpack. The boy blinked at the scene at the front of the plane.
Is she in trouble, Daddy?
Arvind's voice was soft.
She just made a mistake.
And now, someone's holding her accountable. The plane rolled to the gate, but only after the SUVs had pulled away. At the terminal, a side door opened near gate 22. Arvind and Elijah were quietly escorted down the tarmac stairs, away from cameras, through a private corridor where an unmarked car waited. He never raised his voice. He never posted a tweet. He never threatened anyone. But by the time their car pulled onto the freeway, 3 airline compliance directors had been suspended, and the CEO was drafting an apology letter to someone he hadn't even met. It didn't take long. Within 12 hours of Flight 2187 landing at LAX, video clips were everywhere. A blurry shot of Rita being escorted off the plane, a screen-recorded tweet with the line, "He didn't scream, he didn't demand, he just watched," and the system folded. By sunrise, the hashtag #HadSeat2C had trended in 5 countries. What made it go viral wasn't the slap. It was the silence that followed it. The kind of silence that only comes from someone with real power. The kind of power that doesn't ask for attention. It shifts policy without raising a voice. And then, finally, at 9:03 a.m. Pacific, Arvind Suresh spoke. Not in a press conference, not on a live stream, but through a single op-ed published in the Wall Street Sentinel titled, "My son was slapped at 36,000 feet. Here's why I stayed quiet. I didn't escalate the incident because I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in systems. A single slap didn't hurt my son, but the assumption that no one would care, that did. What troubled me wasn't her hand. It was her certainty she'd face no consequence." He ended the piece with one quiet line. "Every system has a reset key. I just pressed mine." The article went live at 9:03. By 9:27, 76 flights across the country had been suspended for internal ethics reviews. By 10:12, $1.15 billion in scheduled payments from Arvind's firm to airline tech vendors were placed on a morality audit hold. The airline that operated Flight 2187 released a statement by noon. "We are working closely with federal agencies and third-party compliance auditors to evaluate this incident." But no one was reading their apology. They were reading his words. Passengers on other flights started asking questions. How do you report a crew member for subtle bias? What happens when the complaint isn't recorded? Why aren't there ethics officers on board? And then came the change. 3 weeks later, a bill passed in Congress requiring every domestic airline to adopt Arvind's Flight Integrity Monitoring Protocol, an AI-backed system that records and flags discrimination in real time, even when passengers don't speak up. Elijah never even saw it happen. He was too young to understand viral moments, or legislative impact, or institutional change. But one day, he'd grow up knowing this. His father didn't yell. He didn't sue. He didn't call the media. He just made one quiet move. And the sky learned to listen. The hearing room wasn't built for drama, but it got plenty that day. Flanked by legal counsel, Rita sat at the far end of the table, her uniform stripped of insignia. Her voice trembled only once, when the panel replayed cabin footage synced with time-stamped behavioral data. "Please note the moment of contact at 18:04 Zulu," one of the analysts said, pausing the frame where Elijah's small body jerked under her hand. Silence followed. Then the lead investigator asked, "Can you explain your decision to physically engage a child in first class?" Rita blinked slowly. "I thought he was being disruptive." "You didn't ask if he belonged there?" "No." You assumed. The word hung in the air like turbulence that wouldn't clear. That same morning, across the country, media panels debated the deeper issue. Not just what happened, but why it keeps happening. How many more stories like this before airlines face real oversight? One anchor asked. Apparently, it took a 5-year-old boy and the right father, her co-host replied. But while the industry scrambled, Arvind remained quiet. Until his phone rang. It wasn't a publicist or attorney. It was the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. "Mr. Suresh," the voice said, "we'd like your input on a new charter, one that would embed ethics accountability into FAA certification, a national standard." Arvind sat still for a moment, not in triumph, but in clarity. "Are you asking for policy or transformation?" he asked. "We're ready for both." They spoke for 47 minutes. By the end, a roadmap was drafted. Ethics monitors on all domestic flights. Passenger dignity scores integrated into route licensing. Mandatory cabin crew recertification in empathy and racial bias. A national whistleblower protection clause for passengers and staff. And at the center of it all, the Elijah Protocol, named after the boy too young to know he'd become a turning point in American aviation history. Arvind never wanted fame. He didn't need headlines. He just wanted a world where his son could fly without needing to prove he belonged. That evening, he and Elijah watched planes land from the window of their hotel suite.
"Daddy?" Elijah asked. "Are we going to fly again soon?"
Arvind smiled. "Yes, son. And next time, the sky will be a little fairer." 6 months later, the skies looked the same, but everything underneath them had changed. On the outside, Flight 8205 from LAX to Seattle was just another early morning departure. Business travelers, sleepy kids, flight attendants reviewing standard safety protocols. Except now, just above the flight attendant's ID badge, a new line read, "Certified in Elijah Protocol, Passenger Dignity Assurance across 217 airports." This phrase had become standard. The Elijah Protocol was no longer a trending topic. It was the foundation of a new system. Airlines that failed the quarterly ethics audit. They lost priority landing slots. Airline staff flagged repeatedly, suspended pending retraining. And passengers? They could now submit real-time AI-analyzed feedback that triggered a silent ethics chain review. No confrontation needed. The industry had learned, power doesn't always raise its voice. It rewrites the rules. At a terminal window, Elijah watched his new plane being prepped. He was taller now. 6 months makes a difference when you're 5. A little more curious, a little more aware. His father knelt beside him, helping him zip up his jacket. "You nervous?" Arvind asked. "A little," Elijah said. "Is this a good one?" "It's a good one," Arvind nodded. "And if it's not, you still have power." The boy smiled, then looked out again. Not far away, Rita Halverson sat on a bench in the employee terminal, not in uniform. She'd completed her mandatory 200-hour reformation course. She hadn't spoken publicly since the incident. No interviews, no social media posts, just silence. The program allowed her the option to apply again, this time under supervision, on regional flights only. But Rita wasn't sure if she ever would. What stayed with her wasn't the backlash, or the headlines, or even the public shame. It was the moment in the hearing room when she saw Elijah's eyes on screen. He hadn't cried. He hadn't screamed. He just sat there, small, stunned, quiet. She never forgot that look. And that silence, his silence, taught her more about consequence than any courtroom could. She watched him now, across the terminal, walking hand in hand with his father. No entourage, no press. Just a little boy heading to his gate. Rita stood, slowly, and as they passed within earshot, she whispered, not expecting them to stop, "I'm sorry." Arvind turned, just slightly. He looked at her, calm, collected, then gave a small, respectful nod. No bitterness, no fanfare, just acknowledgement. Elijah tugged at his dad's sleeve. Are we gonna miss it? Nope, Arvin smiled. Let's go. They boarded. The aircraft felt no different than any other, but when the crew addressed Elijah by name, smiled, and crouched to his eye level without patronizing him, something subtle shifted in the cabin. Not dramatic, not viral, just right. And as the plane lifted into the morning sky, passengers settled into their seats, unaware that the quiet child in seat 2C had once pressed a silent reset button the entire industry had ignored for decades. Outside, the clouds broke open to a wash of soft gold, and inside the cockpit, a small green light blinked. Ethics system, active. Cabin dignity index, clear. For once, the sky didn't just carry people, it carried change. Have you ever seen someone stay silent and the whole system changed because of it? Tell us where you're watching from. This one's gonna stay with you.